Sarah had always lived a simple life. She wasn't one for flashy clothes or extravagant outings. She enjoyed the quiet comfort of her small home, the simplicity of her daily routine, and the love she shared with her husband, Michael. He had always been kind and supportive, but he was also a man of great wealth, a fact that Sarah never quite got used to. Despite the luxurious lifestyle that came with marrying him, Sarah preferred to keep things modest and simple. She never asked for anything extravagant, and she felt comfortable in the world of her small town. One chilly morning, Sarah had to visit the bank. She had received a large check from a client of Michael's company as a form of payment for a personal service she had provided. It was a sum much larger than anything she'd ever handled before, and although it made her uneasy, she knew it needed to be deposited. As she left her house, she pulled on a soft sweater and a pair of simple jeans, making her way to the bank. The weather had been unpredictable, but she wasn't too worried about how she looked. She was just going to do her usual, everyday thing. When Sarah entered the bank, she immediately felt the atmosphere shift. The place was sleek, polished, and filled with people who looked out of place to her. Their clothes were designer, their faces serious, and their air of confidence was something she didn't share. She didn't belong to this world, she thought, but she tried to push the thought away. After all, she was just here to deposit a check. The tellers behind the counters were all busy, helping the people in front of them. Sarah waited her turn, feeling the eyes of others flickering over her. She noticed a few glances, the kind that made her feel small, as though she wasn't supposed to be here. There was something about the cold, impersonal atmosphere of the place that made her feel like an outsider. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, trying to ignore the feeling gnawing at her. Finally, a teller motioned for her to come forward. Sarah walked up to the counter, her heart beating a little faster than usual. The teller, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a bright, forced smile, looked her over quickly before speaking. The next day, Sarah woke up with a feeling that something was different. The air in their home felt lighter, and even the usual hum of the city outside seemed to quiet down, as if the world itself had taken a moment to breathe with her. Michael had taken it upon himself to fix the situation at the bank, but Sarah wasn't sure what to expect. He had reassured her that everything would be handled, but she couldn't quite shake the anxiety that had settled in her stomach since the previous day. The days that followed the call from the bank felt different, almost lighter for Sarah. She still carried the weight of the previous experiences, but there was something about Michael's actions that gave her a sense of reassurance. The way he had stepped in, not to fix things for her, but to ensure she was treated with the respect she deserved, made her feel cared for in a way that was both comforting and new. Over the weekend, Sarah decided to go for a walk in the park, trying to clear her head. She had been feeling conflicted, torn between two worlds: the simple life she had always known and the world of wealth and privilege that Michael had brought her into. She sat on a bench, watching the people around her, some laughing with friends, others lost in their own thoughts. There was a peace in the simplicity of the moment, and Sarah allowed herself to embrace it for a while. As she sat there, Sarah's mind wandered back to the events of the past week. She remembered the way she had felt when she walked into the bank: the smallness, the isolation, and the subtle judgments that had been cast upon her. It hadn't been just about the check, it had been about the way she was seen, like she didn't belong in that world, like she was somehow less than everyone else. But when Michael had stepped in, everything had changed. It wasn't just about the check being cleared, it was about the validation he had given her, the reminder that she deserved respect, no matter where she was or who she was with. She thought about how uncomfortable she had felt when Michael had used his position to address the issue. At first, she had resisted, not wanting to rely on his wealth or status to solve her problems. But over time, she realized that Michael had never seen her as someone who needed rescuing. He had seen her as his partner, someone he cared for deeply, and all he wanted was to ensure she didn't have to face the unfairness of the world alone. The thought brought a sense of warmth to Sarah's heart. It wasn't about the wealth, the status, or the power. Those were things that came with Michael's life, not hers. It was about the love and respect they shared, and the way Michael had stood by her when she needed it most. That was something no amount of money could buy. It was real, it was personal, and it was hers. As Sarah walked back to the car, she reflected on how she had learned to see herself in a new light. The feelings of inferiority that had once clouded her mind were slowly starting to fade. She had always prided herself on being humble, but there was a difference between humility and letting others diminish your worth. She realized that she didn't have to shrink to fit in with anyone. She didn't have to apologize for being who she was, for having a simple, honest life. The key was finding balance, the balance between staying true to herself while also accepting the world she had become a part of. When Sarah returned home, she found Michael in the study, working on some papers. She stood at the doorway for a moment, watching him. Despite the wealth and the power that surrounded them, Michael was still the same person she had married, calm, grounded, and caring. He had never let the trappings of success change who he was, and that was something Sarah admired deeply. Michael looked up and smiled when he saw her standing there. "Hey, you," he said, setting the papers aside. "How was your walk?" "It was good," Sarah replied, walking toward him. She sat down beside him, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a while. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, with the bank and everything else. And I think I finally get it. I don't have to prove myself to anyone. I just have to be myself." Michael's expression softened, and he placed a hand on hers. "You've always been yourself, Sarah. And that's why I love you. You don't need to change for anyone. You're perfect just the way you are." Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her chest. It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to her. She had spent so much time questioning whether she was enough, whether she belonged in this new world of wealth and status that Michael had brought her into. But in this moment, she realized that she didn't have to change who she was to fit in. She didn't have to be anything other than the woman Michael had fallen in love with. As the days went on, Sarah began to find her footing in this new world. She learned to navigate the complexities of wealth and privilege without losing sight of who she was. She wasn't defined by the money or the power, she was defined by her values, her kindness, and the way she treated others. And that was enough. Michael, too, had learned something from the experience. He had always been protective of Sarah, but he realized that he didn't need to shield her from the world. Instead, he needed to empower her, to give her the tools and the confidence to face whatever came her way. And that's exactly what he did. Together, they found a balance between the simplicity of Sarah's life and the complexity of the world Michael lived in. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when Sarah felt like she didn't belong. But she no longer let those moments define her. She had learned to embrace who she was, to trust in her own strength, and to know that no matter what, she had someone by her side who would always stand up for her. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Sarah turned to Michael, a sense of contentment settling in her heart. "You know," she said, "I think I'm finally starting to feel at peace with all of this. I don't have to be anyone else. I just have to be me." Michael smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "And that's all I've ever wanted. To see you happy, to see you be yourself." As they watched the sun set over the horizon, Sarah realized that no matter where life took them, she would always have a place in the world, not because of her wealth or her status, but because of who she was inside. She was strong, she was capable, and she was loved. And that was enough. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her to a place of self-acceptance and peace. She had learned that sometimes, the world might try to make you feel small, but it was up to you to decide whether to let it. And Sarah had chosen to stand tall, knowing that she didn't need anyone's approval to be the person she was meant to be. In the end, it wasn't the world that defined her, it was her own heart, and the love and respect she had found in both herself and the people who truly mattered to her. And with Michael by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The morning unfolded calmly. Sarah prepared breakfast while Michael worked from his office. Despite her inner unrest, the routine of their home gave her some peace. She watched the sunlight filter through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow across the room. It was beautiful, yet the gnawing sense of not fitting in still lingered in her mind. Around noon, Michael stepped into the kitchen, looking as confident and composed as always. He smiled at Sarah, but this time, there was something different about the way he looked at her. There was a quiet determination in his eyes, as though he had already made up his mind about what needed to happen next. "I took care of it," Michael said simply, his voice calm but firm. Sarah paused, her fingers still resting on the edge of the countertop. She wasn't sure how to respond. Michael had already promised to handle things, but hearing it from him directly seemed to bring it all back to life. "Thank you," Sarah said, still unsure about what had actually happened. "What exactly did you do?" Michael sat down at the kitchen table, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. "I spoke with the bank manager. I explained the situation and made it clear that no one should treat you that way. You're my wife, and I don't stand for people making you feel small, Sarah. I also told them that we wouldn't be doing business with them anymore unless they properly address what happened." Sarah felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. Part of her appreciated the gesture, but another part of her felt uncomfortable. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't want Michael to have to step in and fix things for her, even though she knew he wanted to protect her. She had always prided herself on being able to handle things herself. "Michael," Sarah began, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want you to have to do that. I can handle things on my own. I don't need anyone to fix it for me." Michael's eyes softened as he reached across the table and took her hand gently in his. "I know you can handle things, Sarah. But this isn't about fixing things for you. It's about making sure you're treated with respect. You shouldn't have to walk into a place and feel like you're being judged. You're my equal, always." Sarah was silent for a moment, her mind turning over his words. She understood where he was coming from, but it was hard to accept help, especially when it meant confronting the world she was so eager to stay out of. She didn't want to be the woman who relied on her husband's wealth and status to get by. She wanted to carve out her own place, even if it was a small one, where she could stand on her own. "I know," Sarah finally said, squeezing his hand. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just want to be treated like everyone else." "I get that," Michael replied. "But the thing is, you are like everyone else. You deserve the same respect, the same treatment. And if anyone's going to show you that respect, it's me. I'll make sure you never have to face something like that again." Sarah nodded, appreciating his words but still struggling with the idea of being in the spotlight. She loved Michael deeply, and she trusted him, but the thought of using his influence to solve her problems made her feel uneasy. She didn't want anyone to think she was using him to get ahead, even if all he wanted was to take care of her. Later that afternoon, Michael received a call from the bank. Sarah overheard the conversation while she was in the living room. She couldn't make out every word, but she heard enough to understand what was happening. Michael's tone was calm, but there was a firmness to it that made her sit up straighter. She couldn't help but feel a little bit of tension rise in her chest. The conversation was brief, and when Michael hung up the phone, he walked over to where she was sitting. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glint in his eyes that told Sarah something had changed. "They're making things right," Michael said, his voice calm but with an undertone of satisfaction. "They're not going to let this happen again. And they're going to be more careful with their customers moving forward." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed slightly. What do you mean by making things right? Michael sat down beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. I told them what happened, and they assured me that it wouldn't be tolerated. The manager was apologetic, and they're going to review their procedures. You won't have to go back there again if you don't want to. They're giving you priority service from now on. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to feel about that. On one hand, she appreciated the effort. On the other, she didn't want to be treated any differently than anyone else. She didn't need special treatment, and the idea of being elevated above the other customers didn't sit well with her. I don't want to be treated differently, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. I don't want anyone to think I'm using you to get special privileges. I just want to be treated fairly, Michael. That's all. Michael's eyes softened, and he gave her a gentle smile. I understand. But you are special to me, Sarah. I don't mind using my position to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. And if anyone has a problem with that, then that's their issue, not yours. Sarah couldn't help but feel a little bit of relief at his words. Still, she couldn't deny the part of her that felt uncomfortable with the idea of using his power and influence to solve her problems. But deep down, she knew that Michael only wanted the best for her. He wanted her to feel safe, valued, and respected. He wasn't trying to make her dependent on him, he was simply trying to make her life easier, to protect her from the unnecessary stress that came with a world that didn't always understand her. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself thinking more about the situation. She still wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of using Michael's wealth and status to solve problems, but she also knew that this wasn't about taking advantage of him. It was about him standing by her side, as he always had, and making sure she didn't have to face things alone. She wasn't sure how to reconcile those feelings yet, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. The next morning, Sarah received a call from the bank. This time, it wasn't the manager, but a customer service representative offering an apology for the earlier incident. They explained that the bank had conducted a review and would be taking steps to ensure that something like that would never happen again. Sarah listened politely but still felt conflicted. It wasn't about the apology, it was about something deeper, the feeling that she was still navigating a world that didn't quite fit her. As she hung up the phone, Michael walked in, smiling as he noticed the change in her demeanor. Everything okay? Sarah smiled back, feeling a little more at ease. Yes. They're making sure it won't happen again. I guess they're taking it seriously. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with pride. Good. That's all I wanted. As Sarah reflected on the events of the past few days, she realized that maybe there was no easy way to balance these two worlds, the world she had known and the one Michael had brought her into. But as long as they faced it together, she knew they could. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort as she left the bank. The cold air outside didn't help, but it wasn't the weather that made her feel chilled. It was the experience she had just gone through. Walking back to her car, she thought about everything that had happened, the dismissive looks from the tellers, the long wait, and the way the staff had made her feel like she didn't belong. She couldn't help but replay the moments over and over in her mind, each time feeling more humiliated than before. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling drained. She hadn't slept well, her mind racing with the events of the day before. Despite Michael's comforting words, the feelings of inadequacy and the sting of being treated differently at the bank were still fresh in her mind. She pushed herself out of bed, trying to start the day with a sense of normalcy. But the weight of what had happened seemed to hang over her, making everything feel off. As she moved around the house, preparing breakfast, she couldn't help but notice the luxury surrounding her. The beautiful kitchen, the carefully arranged decor, the high-end appliances, everything around her felt foreign and unfamiliar. She didn't want to feel this way, but there it was, like a shadow that followed her everywhere. She knew she was married to a billionaire, but today, the reality of that wealth felt more real than ever before, and it made her feel more out of place than she ever had. When Michael came downstairs, he was already dressed for the day. His usual calm demeanor and effortless confidence made him seem almost untouchable to her at times. He smiled when he saw her, but Sarah couldn't quite return the smile the way she usually did. Instead, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she set down the coffee pot. "Good morning," Michael said, his voice warm. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah forced a smile, trying to mask the worry in her eyes. "I'm okay, just a little tired. Didn't sleep much last night." Michael raised an eyebrow, noticing the change in her tone. "What happened? Did you have trouble with the bank again?" Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar frustration creep back. "It's just. I don't know. I felt so out of place, Michael. It's like I don't belong in this world. I try to ignore it, but I can't." Michael set down his coffee mug and walked over to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "Sarah, you belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let those people make you feel like you don't." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude for his support. But despite his reassurance, Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that had settled deep within her. She had always valued simplicity, and she didn't want to be caught up in a world where appearances mattered more than people. But the events at the bank had made her question if she could really live in this world without changing who she was. As the morning wore on, Michael left for work, his presence lingering in the house even after he was gone. Sarah tried to focus on her day, but the thoughts of yesterday kept creeping in. She decided to take a walk in the garden to clear her mind. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a peaceful glow over the yard. But as she wandered through the flowers, her thoughts continued to race. Why did it matter so much to her that she didn't fit in? Why did she care about what people at the bank thought of her? She had always believed in the value of hard work and kindness, and that should have been enough. Yet here she was, questioning her place in a world she had chosen to be a part of. It felt like she was caught between two worlds: the simple, comfortable life she had always known, and the world of wealth and power that Michael had brought into her life. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Michael. "Hey, I've got a meeting this afternoon, but I'll be home soon. Don't worry about the bank. I'll take care of it." Sarah read the message twice, then put her phone down. She didn't want Michael to get involved. She didn't want him to fix things for her. She had always prided herself on handling things on her own. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe she wasn't supposed to handle everything alone. Michael was her partner, and he cared about her. He didn't want to see her upset or struggling with something that could easily be resolved. Just as she was about to turn back inside, she saw Michael's car pull into the driveway. Her heart skipped a beat as he stepped out, looking as calm and composed as ever. He noticed her standing by the garden and smiled, making his way toward her. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but full of affection. "Everything okay?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. "I just keep thinking about what happened at the bank, and I can't seem to let it go." Michael's expression shifted, his brow furrowing with concern. "You shouldn't have to carry that alone, Sarah. I'm here for you." Sarah nodded, grateful for his support but still unsure of what she needed. "I just feel like I don't belong in that world. I don't fit in with the people there. I'm just me." Michael took her hand, leading her to a nearby bench in the garden. He sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "Sarah, you are more than enough. You don't need to be anyone other than yourself. I've seen your heart, your strength, your kindness. That's what matters. Not the way other people see you." Sarah leaned into him, letting the warmth of his embrace comfort her. For the first time since the bank incident, she felt a little lighter. She knew Michael was right, but it was hard to believe it sometimes when the world around her seemed so focused on appearances and wealth. "I just don't want to lose myself in this," she said quietly. "I don't want to become someone I'm not." "You won't," Michael assured her, his voice firm. "I'll make sure of that. You'll always be you, Sarah. And I love you for exactly who you are." As they sat there together, Sarah realized that maybe she didn't have to choose between the two worlds. Maybe she could be herself, simple and genuine, and still navigate the complexities of a life filled with wealth and luxury. She didn't need to fit in with anyone else's expectations. She only needed to stay true to who she was, and the people who mattered would always see her for the person she was inside. Still, Sarah couldn't help but feel a little bit of unease. She knew Michael meant well, and she knew he wanted to protect her. But part of her wondered if the world she had married into would ever truly understand her, or if they would always see her as the simple woman who didn't quite belong. Later that day, after Sarah had taken some time to reflect, she received a phone call from the bank. It was the manager, and his tone was almost apologetic. He explained that there had been a misunderstanding with the check and that everything had been cleared up. Sarah listened quietly, her thoughts still swirling. She appreciated the call, but it didn't change the way she felt about the experience. As she hung up the phone, Michael walked into the room, his expression determined. "I spoke to them," he said. "They're going to make sure you're treated properly from now on." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. But I don't want special treatment. I just want to be treated with respect." Michael smiled, his eyes soft. "And you will be. I'll make sure of it." She got into her car and stared out of the window, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. The drive home felt longer than usual, and she couldn't stop thinking about how she had been treated. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that it was just a misunderstanding or that she had overreacted. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about the check. It was about the way she had been made to feel less than. As she pulled into the driveway, Sarah's heart felt heavy. She parked the car and took a deep breath before getting out. She didn't want to show Michael how upset she was. He had always been so protective of her, and she didn't want to burden him with her troubles. Still, the weight of it all made her feel like she was carrying something heavy, something she couldn't shake off. Inside the house, everything felt familiar and safe. The warmth of their home, the smell of fresh coffee from the kitchen, the soft music playing in the background, it was all comforting. But even these small comforts didn't bring the peace Sarah needed. Instead, she felt like an outsider in her own life. She had always been a simple woman, but today, she couldn't help but feel as though her simplicity was being looked down upon. She found herself walking toward the living room, where Michael was sitting, reading the newspaper. He looked up as she entered, and his face lit up with a warm smile. But Sarah couldn't return his smile. She tried, but it just didn't come. "Hey," Michael said gently, noticing her change in demeanor. "What's wrong?" Sarah stood there for a moment, her eyes focused on the floor. She wanted to tell him what had happened, but she didn't want to sound like she was complaining. She had always been independent, never one to ask for help or sympathy. She didn't want to be seen as weak, especially not by Michael. I I went to the bank," Sarah finally said, her voice soft and unsure. Michael put down his newspaper and looked at her with concern. "And they treated me differently, Michael. The teller, she questioned the check, and then she made me wait forever. The other people there, they all looked at me like I didn't belong. It was like they thought I didn't have the right to be there." Michael's face darkened slightly. He had never liked the idea of Sarah being made to feel small, especially by people who didn't know her. But he also knew how much she valued independence and didn't like to ask for special treatment. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression softening. "Sarah, you know that you never have to feel that way. You've worked hard for everything you have. You deserve respect, no matter where you go or what you're wearing. You don't need to prove anything to anyone." Sarah let out a deep sigh, sitting down on the couch beside him. She had heard him say these things before, and she knew he meant every word. But today, it didn't seem to make a difference. She didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "I know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it just felt like I was invisible. I don't know if it was the way I looked or if it was the way they saw me, but I felt so small. I don't want to feel that way anymore." Michael reached over and gently took her hand. "You're not small, Sarah. You're the most capable person I know. And you don't have to worry about anyone else's opinion of you. You're my wife, and I love you. And I know what you're capable of." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she so desperately needed. His words comforted her, but the sting of the bank experience lingered. She couldn't help but feel that she didn't belong in the world that Michael had built for them. She had always kept her distance from the extravagant lifestyle, but sometimes, moments like today made her question whether that was the right choice. "Maybe I should have dressed better, or maybe I should have acted more. I don't know," confident. Sarah muttered, her thoughts tangled. "But I just don't feel like that's me. I don't feel like I'm supposed to fit in with that world." Michael squeezed her hand. "You don't have to. You're perfect just the way you are. And if people can't see that, then it's their problem, not yours." She smiled weakly, appreciating his words, but she couldn't help but wonder if he truly understood. After all, he had always moved in circles of wealth and power, while she had remained content in her simpler life. She had never cared for material things, but sometimes, she couldn't help but feel out of place when confronted with that world. The conversation drifted, and for the rest of the evening, Sarah tried to push the thoughts out of her mind. But they kept creeping back in. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the looks from the bank tellers, the coldness in their eyes, and the dismissive way they treated her. The feelings of inadequacy lingered, and she couldn't stop replaying the entire experience in her head. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Sarah's mind remained restless. Michael noticed her unease, but he didn't press her further. He knew that when Sarah was troubled, she needed space to process things on her own. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk," Michael said as he kissed her goodnight. Sarah smiled, grateful for his patience, but the weight of the day still sat heavily on her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to relax, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay awake, her thoughts swirling, questioning the world she had married into, the way she saw herself, and the feelings of inferiority that had crept into her heart. She had always been proud of who she was, but now, she wasn't so sure. It was like the simple, comfortable life she had built was being challenged, and she didn't know how to defend herself from the judgment she felt, even though it wasn't something she had invited. As she finally drifted off to sleep, the unease lingered. She knew she had to find a way to let it go, but for now, it was impossible. "Good morning, ma'am," the teller said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "How can I help you today?" Sarah smiled politely, offering the check she needed to deposit. "I'd like to deposit this check, please." The teller glanced at the check, then back at Sarah, her eyes narrowing slightly. There was a pause, just long enough to make Sarah feel uncomfortable. The teller picked up the check and started to type into the computer, her fingers clicking away on the keyboard. Sarah watched nervously, unsure of what to expect. The teller said, her tone now almost questioning, "This amount seems quite large. Are you sure this is valid? Sarah blinked, feeling a sudden wave of heat flush through her. Yes, I'm sure, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. It's a check from a business transaction. The teller didn't respond right away. She examined the check again, flipping it over, tapping it lightly against the counter as if to inspect it further. Sarah could feel her palms sweating. She didn't understand why the check was being treated like this. It wasn't unusual for her to receive payments for work she did, and this check wasn't the first of its kind. Still, the way the teller was acting made her feel like she was somehow doing something wrong. I'll have to verify this with the higher UPS, the teller finally said, her voice flat. Please take a seat over there, and we'll get back to you. Sarah stood there for a moment, stunned. She nodded quietly, unsure of what else to do, and walked to the waiting area. The seats were plush and well kept, but they felt cold to her as she sat down. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. People around her were chatting on their phones or reading newspapers, none of them noticing the quiet woman in the corner, waiting for the same check to be processed. As Sarah sat there, her mind began to race. Why was this taking so long? Why did they treat her like this? The bank had always been efficient in the past, but today felt different. She glanced around at the other customers, wondering if they could feel the tension in the air, too. It wasn't just the check, it was the way she had been treated. Her simple sweater and jeans seemed so out of place among the well-dressed customers who walked by, the air of confidence around them almost tangible. Sarah felt her heart sink. Was it her that they were judging? She glanced down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. She wasn't used to feeling this way. All her life, she had been told that being kind, respectful, and hardworking were the most important qualities anyone could have. But in this room, those values seemed to count for nothing. The money in her hands didn't matter, nor did the reason for her visit. She was just another small-town woman who didn't fit in with the people around her. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah checked the clock on the wall. 20 minutes had passed, then 30. She could feel the stares from the tellers behind the counter, the whispered comments she couldn't hear but knew were directed at her. She felt small. It was as though, no matter how hard she tried, she would always be just that small. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the teller called her back up. Sarah stood up, her legs a little shaky. She walked back to the counter, her heart still thudding in her chest. The teller handed her the check with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Everything is fine now, the teller said, her tone still polite but distant. You're all set. Sarah took the check and quickly left the counter. She was relieved that the ordeal was over, but the sting of the treatment lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As she walked toward the exit, she realized she had never felt more out of place in her life. The bank, the people, the cold professionalism, it all felt so foreign to her. It was as if she had been invisible the whole time, her worth only being acknowledged when she conformed to some unspoken standard. As Sarah left the bank, she felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had done nothing wrong. Yet here she was, feeling humiliated and small. She couldn't wait to get home, to the comfort of her husband, Michael, who had always made her feel seen. But even he couldn't undo the feeling that clung to her now, the feeling that she would never truly belong in this world of wealth and privilege. This wasn't how she wanted to live her life. She didn't care for the riches or the status that came with them. She just wanted to be treated like everyone else. But today, that seemed too much to ask.